Good afternoon. I'm Scott Griffin, IPI's Press Freedom Advisor for Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm here with Alison Bethel McKenzie, who is our Executive Director, to talk a little bit about the importance of journalism to democracy. So Alison, first question for you would be, why is journalism so important in democratic countries? What role does it play?
I think journalism is important in all countries. I just believe that the democratic countries tend to have a greater appreciation for the role that journalism plays. Journalism is considered one of the foundations on which democracy is built. And journalists hold people's feet to the fire. And I say people because often people will say government, businesses, but I think it's everyone. Everyone who has any sort of venture, everyone who's counting on public funds, everyone who's tilling the soil that belongs to the community and producing agricultural goods. So journalists are able to report on what they see, what they learn from investigative journalism, and are able to ask the tough questions without, we hope, without fear of reprisal. Of course, as you know, that's not always the case.
Unfortunately, yes. Alison, IPI is currently working on a handbook for journalists covering the Millennium Development Goals. Why is IPI doing this, and how can journalists help make sure that the MDGs are completed by 2015? What can they do to make sure the governments get to work?
I'm very, very excited about this project, and I'm excited about it because people tend to, the big thing today is to cover politics. Everyone wants to cover politics. Politics sells, sex sells. But what should sell is more information on things that people rely on in their everyday lives, or issues that people confront in their everyday lives, like healthcare, the HIV/AIDS situation, poverty, birth rates among children in some countries. It is critical that the media covers these stories and tell the real stories of the people they are intended to serve. What the problems are, where the money's going, who's spending the money, whether or not the money is even getting to the people it's supposed to get to. This is important not only for developing countries, but also for developed countries who also are putting money into the pot to make sure that these Millennium Development Goals are being met. We don't have very much time left. 2015 is around the corner. Many countries are not close to meeting their goals. Others have been successful and are meeting their goals. But our publication, as you know, because you've worked very hard on it, along with Mariela Hoyer, another staff member, is to teach journalists how to cover topics that they wouldn't normally cover, like poverty. How do you cover poverty? How do you approach the topic? How do you get real voices involved? But as important as it is for journalists to cover these issues, it's equally, or in some cases more important, for publishers, broadcasters, editors to actually broadcast, publish these stories. I know they're not always the sexy story, but they're the important story, and they're the important story that drives the economy, that drives the well-being of the community.
And the book gives some tips on how reporters can convince editors that these stories are really important. So that's great. One other thing is that, what about the role of journalism ethics? Because IPI stands not only for press freedom, but also about professional standards of journalism. How does that come into the equation when we talk about democracy?
Well, the International Press Institute, as you know, is the world's oldest global press freedom organization, and we're built on 3 pillars. They are creating dialogue among different peoples so that you can create peace among the world, or at least bring different opposing groups together so that they can talk about their differences and that the media can report accurately on the differences, whether they're religious or I don't know, geographical or racial or whatever. Also, best practices, journalism best practices. We believe that all responsibility comes with all privilege comes with some responsibility. And so we believe that journalists must strive to be the best that they can be, to be free, fair, unbiased in their reportage. So we're very much concerned about that, and we do training around the world periodically to enhance journalistic skills. We have some training coming up in the Caribbean. And then, of course, the basis of what we do is press freedom. We advocate for a free media around the world, a media that is not subjected to jail terms, excessive fines, or being even the extreme of being kicked out of the business because they're not considered a journalist and so they can't have a specific card. So those three things are important to us. But at the end of the day, we're finding, especially with the proliferation of online media, that ethics is becoming even more critical because you have to practice good journalism in order for us to be able to defend you. We can defend you anyway, but when you intentionally libel someone, it makes it harder for your colleagues to receive information, to be perceived as being believable. So ethics is a foundation of what journalism is built on. There are a code of ethics, which all journalists around the world follow. And increasingly, we're encouraging online media to either come up with their own code of ethics or adapt the traditional code of ethics so that they're also following a code of ethics. So it's critical. It's very important.
Thank you. And lastly, speaking specifically about the Caribbean, you yourself worked in the Caribbean as a journalist. In what ways have you seen Caribbean media support the people in the region's right to know about matters of public importance?
I really wish that the Caribbean was a little farther than it is. You still have criminal defamation laws. You still have the Christian Council in many countries that frown on certain stories being printed. You still have a level of intimidation, sometimes with police officers coming by the newsroom.